Well, welcome to the Painted Porch. We are so happy that you're joining us today for one of our porch perspectives here on the Painted Porch. There's a lot of P's, I know. Welcome. My name is Amy Yakowski. For those of you who I don't know, I am the founder and chief evolution officer here at Painted Porch Strategies. We are a training and consulting company that focuses on helping organizations prepare for successful change, whether big, small, in their life or their work. Today, for Porch Perspectives, what we do here is we just like to sit down with people that we know and love and admire in the staffing industry who are shifting mindsets and are leading change and helping to flip the script from what we would consider staffing business as usual to reimagining the industry, how we work, how we serve, and how we grow and thrive with people being at the center of all of that. So for today's Porch Perspective, I am so excited and honored and grateful to be joined by Katie Breault, who is the Senior Vice President of Growth and Impact at YUPRO, Year Up Professional Resources. Katie, thank you so much for being here today and joining us on the porch.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. So Katie, you and I first met. We had the pleasure of being paired up last year for SIA's Healthcare Staffing Summit. And I think when we first started talking, we immediately hit it off because we found that we shared a lot of similar viewpoints and ideas about where the industry is and where it's going and ways that we can help maybe shift those mindsets a little bit from current ways of thinking and doing to something that's new and innovative. So here on the porch, we like to talk about the idea of transformative journeys and how they're rarely a straight shot. They're rarely preset or obstacle free. And so what I'd love to do is just take a few minutes and have you share a little bit of maybe your transformative journey that brought you to YUPRO and your role there.
Sure, I'd love to talk about my background, and it is an interesting one. I think that from an outsider's perspective, if you look at my career journey, it seems like a continuous midlife crisis, but it is grounded. It is grounded in my pursuit of my passion, which has a happy ending with me here at YUPRO. But I always knew that I wanted to make a really positive impact in the world. And I remember that as a child, I used to envision whatever it is, it's going to get 2 pages in a world history book. Forget the US history book. Like, this is going to be 2 pages in a world history book for this amazing change I'm going to make. And so I spent my early career looking for where that passion would come from. And it spanned from policy to the culinary arts, which is an excellent example of failure and picking yourself back up, to executive coaching and leadership development. But my constant desire to make a positive impact in the world led me to a volunteer opportunity to serve as a mentor for a young adult through a program called Year Up. And while I was volunteering, I was just so struck by this young woman's commitment and drive to be successful in this internship opportunity and her desire for this to turn into an employment opportunity. And I saw the impact on this one person, that getting that opportunity to get her foot in the door, how it could change the trajectory of her entire life and the life of her family. And as a result, it really changed mine. And so that was 9 years ago. And I went quickly from serving as a mentor to shifting my career and getting involved with this organization. I launched new sites across the country. I ran some events. I managed interns. I worked with our corporate partners. And I am now on what I think is the best part of our entire business, which is the placement of these talented adults in their next career opportunity. So this is where I've been now for 4 years. I just celebrated my 4-year anniversary, and thank you. And hopefully the fact that this journey started 9 years ago is testament to the fact that I did find my passion and chipping away at those 2 pages.
Yeah, and that journey, that's definitely one that had some unplanned detours along the way. You mentioned culinary being one of them, but it sounds like through all of that, you've really tried to embrace a little bit of the unknown and embracing the idea of change and having a growth mindset as you approach these new adventures in your life, some of them that weren't necessarily on the path that you planned, as what usually happens in staffing.
It's true. That is the constant. And, it's interesting because the actual job and the industry and that did change, but there's stability in knowing what your constant is. And my constant was always finding this passion to make a positive impact. And then all the change that surrounds that pursuit isn't as important as that constant that I was focused on. And so I feel like that's really where change is a little bit easier to digest when you decide to ditch your 4-year degree that you had earned to go be a chef and your parents are wondering what the heck happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I remember when we first started talking last year, you talked about how it sounds like both you personally, but also YUPRO as an organization, you really adhere to this idea of that North Star. And I think that's what you were just alluding to here too. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's when you're open to change but you know the direction that you're going in, it helps to keep you focused. And I think that's key.
And is that something that you adopted early on? Is that something that you learned from someone in your life when you were younger about having this congruency, this kind of North Star point to help kind of check yourself, but also give yourself, to your point, that reassurance that even though something is changing, it's still changing in alignment with the direction and the person that you want to become?
Absolutely. I've had the good fortune to have many mentors throughout my life, within my family, but then also throughout my young career. And I feel like every time I've gone to a mentor seeking advice, and it's because I feel stuck. After that conversation, it helped me realize that first, the answer is usually already in my brain. Just need some help sorting it out. But also, when you get stuck, sometimes it's because you're so determined to make something work that doesn't need to work. And so the repetition of that process and realizing, well, here's my end goal and where I want to get, and I was stuck on something that didn't necessarily matter to the end goal, it helps develop the mindset of staying focused on that true north. And so it's a long way of saying, I think every time that I've gone to a mentor, it's usually with a problem. And the unraveling of that problem has always helped me realize the answer is a lot simpler than it feels. And being able to stay true to what I'm actually trying to achieve is the key.
So having that true north, has that helped you when it comes to how you define change? Basically, what change means to you and how you think about it and how you approach it when either it's something that's a conscious choice or it's something that's maybe kind of thrust upon you that, oh, well, I guess I have to pivot or else can't keep going on this same path.
I think it's all of the above. So
yeah.
If I could say, I think change is constant. And I think that I operate in my personal and professional life expecting it. And so it doesn't necessarily throw me personally off because I'm expecting it. And so in that way, it almost provides a sense of stability, knowing that change is going to happen. And I certainly have plenty of moments where I'm caught off guard and, you do have to shift. But with every career change that I made in my professional life, it always came with a need to reflect, but not be so. I'm thinking about, I have this little list of very, very old list of 10, that wasn't slick at all, 10 rules. It's taped to my desk and it's very, very old. But Colin Powell's 10 rules for success. And one of the ones that I always think about is never have your ego so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. And so I think about that Because as long as you know where your values are and what your end goal is, all the other pieces, you have to expect that you're going to need to shift in order to meet that end goal. And surely, whatever it is that's changing, for the most part, doesn't tend to be the real end objective. So to give an example, I went into the culinary arts because I like to cook, and I was coming out of a career in policy where I just watched a year of my work not really matter, because that's just kind of the way things are sometimes, because the project fell through. And so I wanted a job where I could know tangibly at the end of the day, here's what I created. It was consumed. In theory, it would have been enjoyed, but I'm a horrible cook, so neither here nor there. But I wasn't so committed to being successful as a chef as I was to being committed to figuring out what that thing was that I really wanted to devote my career to. One mentor that I had told me, this is not the best work-life balance advice, but said, in order for you to be excellent at anything, you need to do it 80 hours a day. And in order to do anything 80 hours, per week. And in order to do anything 80 hours per week, you need to love what you do. And so if you don't love what you do, stop doing what you're doing and find the thing that you love.
Right.
I've always had that mindset of figuring out what's the real thing that I'm looking for. And then all the other things are just details.
Yeah. And it makes me think, when so many people think about change, they view it as a disruption to what's known today, what's understood, or that certainty of it. But I love the idea of having that North Star, that compass point that you're always pointing towards, that more represents the value, or the true goal, the true journey that you're trying to go down, versus measuring it by a very specific rigid outcome. Because so often, if you do that, you put yourself in a box, and number one, it makes it really hard for you to meaningfully measure success and feel fulfilled at it, right? To your point, you have to love what you're doing, but also it prevents you from spotting those opportunities that might be right outside that little box that you drew when it comes to, change. I think personally, and in businesses, so often they define the change a little too rigidly. And I love that the way you just approach it, both in your life and in your work, is having more of that thematic intent around it, versus, I want to change this specific thing so that X can happen. Because the reality is, as we all know, none of us can predict the future. None of us can ensure. We don't have control over what's necessarily going to happen in our lives day in and day out. We're a lot of times we're just along for the ride. But if we're intentionally along for the ride, that definitely helps ensure that you're staying on track and finding and continuing to tap into that purpose and that fulfillment along the journey, even sometimes when it gets a little rough.
Right. And again, if you do know your broader goal and your true north and what it is you're looking to do on this macro level, but then also even on a micro level with projects and day-to-days, and knowing what the real goal is of what you're trying to achieve, and you expect there to be obstacles, and you expect there to be change, and you expect that things aren't going to go as planned, it makes it easier to pivot and adjust and get to where you're going. There's some analogy in what I'm trying to explain with boats and how they're designed, but that would be going down a path where I pretend I know about boats. But I know there's something there about how it needs to ride with the waves. Similarly, you just need to be prepared for to change course.
Yeah. It's a very Stoic principle. One of the things that the Stoics teach is this idea of premeditatio malorum. It's a really big, jumbly word, 2 words actually, but it's exactly that. It's planning for what can go wrong. And I remember early on when I was learning about Stoicism and I was explaining this concept to people, there were a lot of people that got a little taken aback by it. They were like, wait, why would you want to focus your energy or focus your attention on what can go wrong instead of just, focusing on the positive and focusing the possibilities? And I'm like, no. It's not so much spending your energy. It's not being the Debbie Downer or the cynic all of the time, but it's that idea of expecting that things are going to get thrown in your path, that obstacles are going to be encountered, and then being prepared for it, having a plan of how you're going to address it. And I think that's so important when you're going down a change journey in your life, but especially when it comes to projects and work. So often projects kick off and it's like this aspirational goal of what's going to happen, and everybody gets super excited and pumped, and then they hit an obstacle, and then that energy and that motivation and that drive drops significantly because they're taken aback. I never thought this would happen. And there is value in actually preparing for potential failures along the way, because to your exact point, you're ready, you're prepared, you can move forward.
And
so that's what they were talking about.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that example. It makes me think about this conference that I was just at, and without naming the entities, we just invested in this huge tech project trying to make something happen. And we were so invested in it that we were just like, it had to happen. There was no alternative. And we're so fortunate that we have, I know that in our earlier conversations, I was talking about our CEO and how she leads with intent, and she has this change mindset. And I will admit that I got to a place where it almost became about winning. Like it has to happen because it was supposed to happen, and we had the plan. And she asked such a great question of, why does it have to happen this way? Like, what's the actual end goal? And we stopped in our tracks, everything that we'd been working on for 8 months, to pivot, readjust, reassess, and make sure that we were going in the right direction. And that example, it happens all the time in our work lives, in our personal lives, where we need to pause and try to figure out, what are we so determined to make work? And is it actually connected to what the end goal is? And the reason I thought about the conference was, it turns out everyone in our industry was having a very similar experience of being so determined to make something work with technology, and it didn't work the way they thought it would, and they learned a bunch of things along the way, but had to stop and pivot.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a wonderful way, and it goes back to what you talked about with Colin Powell, that ego, right? So often the idea of getting it done, making it happen, hitting the deadline, a lot of it is for winning's sake. And a lot of that is tied to our egos, how that will make us look, how we'll feel, how we'll be viewed by others. And I love that Michelle just took that step back and said, well, wait a minute, what is it that we're really trying to achieve here? And are we trying to force it to happen, which is then ultimately going to result in probably subpar adoption. Probably in a couple months, you'll go back to what you used to do. Morale's going to probably take a little bit of a tank because people feel like they're working harder to try to achieve the same thing. And so it's wonderful that she was willing to pause and ask that question, even though it might have resulted, and maybe it did, in having to either, abandon the 8 months of work that you had already done, or risk something taking a little bit longer than what you originally planned, but doing it, ensuring that you're staying focused on what that end goal is that you're trying to achieve, as opposed to like ticking the box of, yep, we did it this way with this tool in this method.
Right. And that's the hardest, those are the hardest times to have to really get into that change mindset, is when you have to change because something isn't going well. It's the worst. Nobody likes to admit that something isn't going to work. Those are the moments where really leveraging those tools and those skills that you've used to have some sort of victory or triumph because you had that mindset, to just sometimes stop doing something that isn't working, and to be okay with that. Because again, going back to that true north, or what the real end goal is.
Yes, I think not getting so attached to the outcome, because the outcome is one of the things that is ultimately outside of our complete control. We can have influence. We can try to advise and make decisions based on the knowledge that we have today. But as we continue to move forward, I think it's so critical, to your point, not just that one time, but regularly, to be able to just check in with yourself, check in with your team, and say, hey, how do we feel about this? Do we feel like this is still moving down the right path? And having and building up those trust credits and accountability to be able to speak up authentically and honestly and say, you know what, I'm not sure if it is. And is there another solution or another path that we can take to still get us to our destination that we're trying to get to?
And trust that is so key with being willing to be the kind of leader that is willing to change direction and shift and consider the actual operating reality that you're in, and that builds trust. And that is so important when you're trying to build or grow anything, is you need that trust.
Yep. Especially when you're trying to introduce change to what people know, feel comfortable with, and understand. 100%. So with YUPRO, your whole focus is helping to put opportunity talent to work. I'd love to have you just take a couple minutes for those maybe who are hearing that term for the first time. What does that mean to you and to your organization?
Sure. Opportunity talent is a term used to generally categorize those who might have some barrier to employment that has nothing to do with their ability to do the job, with their skills, but might be the zip code that they grew up in and not having the same access to opportunity that others might. And so our entire focus is, how can we bridge what we call the opportunity gap? We have so many employers out there seeking talent to fill their jobs, and so many people seeking jobs in career mobility, and we're trying to connect them. Sometimes that looks like upskilling and training. Sometimes that looks like just helping them get interview ready or brush up their resume. But the talent is there, and we have plenty of employers who are seeking to hire them. So we're just the bridge.
So with that, I mean, that is in many ways a big mindset shift from how the definition of talent has been viewed for, I would say, for the more modern time. We've talked about what it was like 100 years ago, and it was all apprenticeship. But in the more modern era, say in the last 40 years or so, it's shifted. And so as an organization, how are you helping to change minds, be it with the clients that you're working with, or the folks within your organization, or the talent that you're trying to put to work? How are you helping to shift minds on what it means to be a qualified and ready talent to put to work?
Sure. So when I think about the work that we do with our talent and with our amazing employer partners, I feel like the changing of the minds has to do with the how and not necessarily the what. So again, going back to the true north, the great thing about the work that we do is everyone is coming in with the same goal. We know that employers coming to us to find talent, they know they want to they want support for their DE&I hiring strategies. They want to diversify their pipelines. They want to get better about hiring diverse talent, and they want to know how to be successful. So that mindset is aligned with our true north, and we're helping them understand, here are some of the things that might be, here's some obstacles that you might be unintentionally creating. For example, a degree requirement that on a job description is immediately going to exclude a large population of talent that would be very successful in this role, where a degree isn't really required. So it's about looking at all of the different steps in the process and how they might be taking away from the end goal. And so helping to shift their mindset with how they hire, how they advertise jobs, how they interview, what they think talent looks like, because we already know that we have this shared value with them of connecting opportunity talent to employment. And then on the candidate side, especially for early career talent who haven't had a job in corporate America, it's really a partnership with helping them understand here's what success looks like in this role, and we're here to support you. And it's about shifting their mindset with what it means. I oftentimes describe it like going to a different country. Like corporate America they have different expectations, and they have oftentimes unsaid expectations that end up being barriers to folks who might not be familiar with them. For example, I remember when I had my first job, I thought that you could just show up on the days where they said you could show up. I thought that's what the schedule was, 8 to 5 on Monday, Wednesday, 12 to 5. And if whatever those shifts I wanted to show up at, I could. Why would I know any better? And so similarly, we're here to support navigating that first job or that next job, and really serve as that intermediary so that feedback is being given to our talent, and we're connecting that feedback from the manager with our talent to support them in achieving their shared desire for a successful placement. So again, everybody wants the same thing, and we're really just trying to help people shift to achieve that goal.
Yeah, and I noticed that you're also a certified strength coach. So I imagine that there is a lot of coaching that goes along with the work that you do, especially with your clients, because they have had this preset notion of what an employee or what talent looks like, what education they've had, what experience they've incurred. And so I imagine that there's a little bit of coaching there, because while everyone wants the same goals, sometimes our own preconceived notions, our own fears, our uncertainties, what's familiar can sometimes get in the way of that. So how do you coach to that?
Great question. So I'll get very granular with an example. I remember that I was coaching a young adult, and they were going to an internship for the first time. And they had this bright pink hair, and there was something in the dress code about not having these bright colors for hair dye, which I think has since kind of changed. But the conversation with this young adult wasn't, you need to change your hair to a natural color because that's what the employer is asking for. The conversation was talking about, okay, here are the options, and here are the end results of each option, and really helping to bring them through. There is not this is what you have to do. You always have so many different choices, and it's about evaluating each of these choices and seeing if that's the end result. So you keep the color of your hair, you are violating their dress code. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It does not matter to me, but you need to know that this is going to be the end result, that you don't end up in this job. That's okay if this isn't the right fit for you. Alternatively, dye your hair, and you're adhering to the dress code, and then you can be evaluated for the skills that you've learned, and then maybe when you're a manager, you can dye the hair back. So a very small example, but always thinking about the fact that there are choices and there are options, and again, pausing and thinking. It's not digging your heels in about a detail that might not matter as much, or really assessing if that detail matters a lot, and staying the course if that's what you want to do. But that's how I try to approach coaching. And then from a strengths-based perspective, similarly, Strengths Finder and the strengths-based coaching approach is all about what are you really good at and how can you lean into that. And also, you can't and you don't have to be good at everything. And so it's a real acceptance of everyone is going to have things that they're best at. And what I'm best at is probably not going to be the same as what you're best at. And really going into that mindset of, okay, so you're not really organized. You need to develop some systems to keep yourself organized, but also let's not have that be the number one job description item that you need to have in this next job. And that's okay. It doesn't have to.
Right. And then through that also, I think bringing the awareness to what your strengths are, as well as an understanding of what your weaknesses are, can provide that wonderful opportunity when it comes to a team to saying, here's what I'm really great at. Here's maybe where I struggle at. Oh, you're really good at this thing I struggle at. So can we help support one another and pair up? I think that that's also such a wonderful thing that we sometimes overlook when it comes to teams.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They actually there's a study done by Gallup and leveraging that whole StrengthsFinder concept about the top things that people are looking for in a leader. And those are, goodness gracious, now I'm relying on my memory, trust, stability, hope, and compassion. And so those are the 4 things, and you can achieve those 4 things in a lot of different ways. But then thinking about that concept of stability, which feels like it's so different from change. It goes back to that concept of stability. When you know that change is going to happen, means creating an environment where change is constant, and like where you're prepared for that, and that creates that sense of stability and builds that trust. And that applies to coaching too. When we have a young adult who's looking for coaching, or a manager who's looking for coaching to be successful in our partnership, those are the 4 key pillars you have to think about building in order to move something forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And also understanding that each person has their own preconceived, I'm not going to say baggage, but preconceived beliefs and notions and emotions about what change means to them. Maybe it's based on past experiences, but being able to recognize that, and to what your point is to be able to embrace it and actually view it as an opportunity for stability when it comes to how you approach change, but being compassionate and understanding about how each person initially interprets change, and then being able to help support them through that and give them the reassurance that they need. Whether it's something where they are change averse because they like things, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, or they're just like gangbuster changers all the time, and finding that happy medium to be able to communicate as a leader to provide that stability, that reassurance, and that certainty that both sides need in order to move the change forward effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I really like what you said about, and it is the strengths mindset, about making sure that if I'm really good at something, or if I know that I have this area that is not my strong suit, but maybe that's yours, how somebody who is going to make waves and drive change is going to be the person who surrounds themselves with people who do the things that they can't necessarily do as well. And I think that really ties into, on a different level, the work that we're doing to help companies get to achieve their DE&I goals. Because the reality is, when you think about diversity and equity and inclusion, it's not comfortable. And being committed to driving DE&I in an organization means being committed to constant change. And for someone like myself, who's very action oriented, and clearly from my career, I'm not afraid to jump into new things and cross my fingers and hope it all works out. But the reality is, change is hard, and it doesn't always feel good, and it isn't always comfortable. And that's what it means to work on a diverse team. And you see time and time again, I challenge someone to find a study that says diversity doesn't drive productivity. Diversity doesn't lead to growth. It is a good thing, and it's good because it's hard, and it challenges your thinking, and you're bringing diverse perspectives and diverse skill sets. And there's this term that is leveraged. I think it's fluency heuristic, but it's about how our brains are just accustomed to wanting things to be easy. And it's our natural desire and intuition for bias, because the way the brain works to make things easier means that we want to surround ourselves with the same people. We want to go in the same direction. We want tomorrow to be the same as today. And what we don't realize is that that's the opposite direction to go in if you're looking to reach your goals, to be productive. And it's that diversity that really drives us forward.
Yeah, exactly. Diversity of talent, diversity of skills, diversity of mindsets and approaches, both when it comes to, whatever you're doing in your role and in your organization, but also as you approach change. One of the things that they study on the Porch is change style preferences. I think I mentioned that earlier. And, they talk a lot about in the research that you definitely don't want everybody, you don't want all conservers on a team, nor do you want all originators on a team. You want to have a mixed balance, because conservers, if that's all there is, nothing will ever change, because why change it? It's not broken. If it's all originators, it's just going to be change for change's sake, and it's going to be chaos. You have to have the balance between them and that diversity of thought and approaches and behaviors, and then being able to develop, to your point, that trust within the team in order to be able to feel confident to speak up, to share, to challenge, and to not take it personally, but be able to view it as those opportunities to shift, to pivot, to grow, and then to thrive. Because if not, if you're not growing, you're just kind of treading water, and eventually, things are gonna start to whittle away.
And that's where that foundation of trust comes back into play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So final thought here, when it comes to change, what would you recommend to either, an individual or an organization who's maybe seeking to introduce a little bit of change into their firm? Maybe it's through bringing in new opportunity talent, or maybe shifting a workflow or a mindset or an approach to how they do business. Where do you think that they should start?
Great question. I would love to promote the work of my organization and say hiring opportunity talent will solve all of your problems, but and it solves a lot of them. Mm-hmm. But I think that anyone trying to introduce change, first you need to. It goes back to those principles with leadership and true north, and just taking a page from my CEO's book, really understanding where you're at and getting the perspectives of the people who are impacted by the change. Even if it happens that you wanted to propose the change that actually would make this huge transformative push in the right direction, you need your team to be on board. And to be on board, they need to feel heard. And to feel heard, you have to talk to them to get their perspective. I think about this example from another mentor in my life who went overseas to do a project. They got to figure out what this project was to help this village. And this village, what they kept hearing was, we want a soccer field. And they were like, oh, you don't have running water, so we're not going to build you a soccer field. And they kept trying to think through, how do we get them the running water that we know they need. So they created this insert expertise on creating clean water device, but then it was never used, and it ended up rusting away, and it was pointless. And it turns out they really wanted that soccer field because there was discontent within the village, and they needed to find ways to bring them all together so that then they could make the trip back and forth to where they were getting the water. And the lesson that this mentor took away was, how do we just listen to them? It would have been easier. We would have had their buy-in. We would have solved the problem they were looking for. And so similarly, when you're introducing change, make sure that you're going in with knowing that you understand the problem and the perspectives of the people who are impacted, and so they know that you care, so that then when you're bringing change to your organization, you have the buy-in. That would be followed by hiring opportunity talent, and then everything will work out well.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. What a wonderful lesson, especially as a consultant in my past life. Often people come to you and they try to present to you the solution when you're eliciting feedback about what the problem is. But sometimes it's just, to your exact point, it's just sitting there a little bit longer, having a little bit deeper conversation to actually find out what the root problem is that they're wanting to solve. So to that exact point, they wanted a soccer field, but there were all of these barriers to the soccer field. But their true desire was to create a sense of community and engagement. And so once you dig through that and you can find, oh, okay, this is really what they're trying to achieve. Soccer was the solution that they thought would solve it. And it may very well have been, but it definitely wasn't clean water. But soccer may have been the solution, but being able to be a little bit more open to listening and hearing and speaking with your people, because ultimately you're exactly right. Your people are what are going to make or break your change. We focus so much when it comes to change on the thing that we're trying to change, the new tool that we're trying to introduce, the operational shift that we're trying to create. But the truth is that the success or failure of it is going to start and end with the confidence, the mindset, and the capabilities and adoption of those people that are doing it day in and day out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So any other final words of wisdom that you would like to share, Katie, as we wrap up our chat today?
I do have whenever I'm in a position where I'm having to reflect and think about a change that I might not even necessarily be wholly on board with yet, but know that something needs to happen. There, in addition to my torn apart piece of paper here, I have a quote that I always think of, and that's, "In a world of change, the learners inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists." And by Eric Hoffer. And I think about that because I mean, it's so true. If we're not shifting, if we're not adapting, if we're not going into any aspect of our lives expecting the change that needs to happen, we'll be inheriting something that we are no longer prepared for. So I carry that with me all the time.
I love that. I love that. That's such a wonderful quote. It's like famous last words, "I know," right? As opposed to "what don't I know?" What can I discover? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love it. Well, Katie, thank you so much for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation. If people want to find out more about Opportunity Talent, how can they connect with you?
Please find us on LinkedIn under Year Up Professional Resources, or YUPRO. Visit our website. It's still in the process of being revamped, so you're in for quite a treat, at www.upro.com. And then please, of course, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
Wonderful. And if you're curious about this thing called change and how you as an organization can better prepare your people for change to be more adaptable, confident, resilient, let us know. Check us out on thepaintedporch.com. Katie, thank you so much again. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And I know that we will keep talking about change for many, many years to come.